Hi, I'm Morgan, and welcome to another episode of the Slick Podcast. Keeping it real, and always keeping it groovy.
You have tuned in for a Slick Podcast. I'm here to seek the truth. Live from Scotland around the UK. The one and only Slick Podcast. Enjoy the show. Can I ask important questions? No matter how bizarre the truth might be. Tune in for Slick Podcast. Keeping it real, keeping it groovy.
Good morning, good evening, good afternoon, or a very good day to you when and wherever you're listening from. And a very warm welcome to the show. I'm your host, Simon Laurie King. Before we get started, for those of you listening on YouTube, you will notice that my guest shortly will be streamed. This is my first attempt at a video cast. I've deliberately left myself out of the stream for this interview, as it's all about my guest, and it will be a good learning curve. Please forgive any hiccups that may follow along the way. So, coming up on today's show, my guest is one of the, if not the most expert on Neolithic survival techniques, but not just survival, living also, making everything needed to survive and thrive. His work with flint knapping and the production of beautiful arrowheads, stone knives, axes, his skill as a longbow maker and arrow fletcher also is gaining notoriety worldwide. My guest is also a sword maker of the Bronze Age type design, the mining for the material, the processing, foundry and smithing of them also. My guest has appeared on the Discovery Channel amongst other television shows, pitting his skills against survivalist and explorer Ed Stafford, while both separately making their way through very hazardous terrain in China. My guest also today runs courses on prehistoric survival techniques, where his participants experience 4 days of a meaningful return to the land under his expert guidance and knowledge, living and surviving as our ancestors did thousands of years ago. Or if you fancy a woodland banquet, that could also be arranged. Sword making courses, longbow making and the use are just a small part of what my next guest offers in his prehistoric resume. So without further delay, it's my absolute pleasure to welcome Will Lord to the show.
Thanks for having me along, Simon.
Let's get the ball rolling on this one. Will, you have over 40 years of experience as a man who pursues the way of our ancestors, the making of fire, hunting and trapping of fish and game, foraging of herbs and vegetables for food and medicine, the making of tools for everyday use such as the axe and knife, to longbows, swords and arrow tips. I absolutely haven't covered it all as the list goes on and on. This is definitely more than a passing interest. I would say a way of life. Tell us how it began.
Well, it all began as a child at the age of 5 years old. My mum and dad moved from a little town that's quite local to where I am now, Thetford, and we went to live at a Neolithic ancient flint mine, which was being a site where flint was being mined over 4,000 years ago. They were working for what's now known as English Heritage as custodians of the site, and a house went with it. And well, instead of growing up in a town like a normal youngster would these days, I grew up in a little house set in thousands of acres of Thetford Forest with the Neolithic flint mine. And a mum and dad that were interested not only in the general public that came there, but interested in these skill sets that actually people employed who would have been there 4,000 years ago. So as a backdrop to my life, I was exposed to the eating and the skinning of deers, hunting rabbits. We had a river nearby where I spent a lot of time, and generally spending a whole lot of time in the forest. And what that does is it builds a very pleasant picture of the way you exist. So that was my starting grid, and we were there for 13 years. So I was there up until the age of 17.
So where a lot of young adults, children, young adults are influenced by television and their peers, which can be a good thing, but mostly these days a bad thing. You were influenced by nature around you, that natural pull for our species.
Well, we had a television in our house up until the age of me being about 3. And then my sister went round the back of the telly with a pram, which made the TV explode, and it was never replaced.
Fantastic. You have different courses running that are offered to the public. A 4-day course, I'm guessing, sees the participants living in the woods, devoid of technology and as close as possible to nature, learning the skills of living all over again in that untamed environment. I shouldn't think there would be many that would miss the television, which we just mentioned, whilst food and shelter are the priority first and foremost. Could you outline the day in the life, as it were, for a participant on this particular course?
Okay, so when they arrive, what they're encouraged to do is they're given one of 2 options: either set the tent up, which is where they're going to be navigating from every day to come on the course, or there's a little open aired forest lodge, which gives you a kind of an opportunity to sleep in the woods with a fire, and you wake up in the forest with all of that, the lovely dawn chorus and so on, but you're dry. So they've got that as an experience to get started with. And then what is happening over a 4-day period is quite a lot of people come by themselves. There's a lot of friendships made on the course because they end up relying upon each other for the first thing is that social dynamic. And on a 1-day course, you might not get that implemented quite so well. But over 4 days, they begin to learn to trust each other, and they form little groups which they like. But generally, when it comes down to it, what I'm asking from them is I'm inviting them to look at a group of skills that they could try out, like making longbows and arrows and flint knapping and firecraft and making nets, chopping down a tree with a flint axe and then using the bark so that they can make containers from it. They're looking at natural fibres such as the stinging nettles and lime bast, bark fibres that can give you string. And cutting into that, you've got glues, you've got butchery and fire management and cooking. So there's a whole echo of different things that can happen. And generally, they've come because they don't generally have that as a day-to-day thing in their life. And it's true to be said that these skill sets can be very challenging. Basic knife craft, axe craft might not be things that they're familiar with. So I can't always have an expectation that people are going to do things anywhere near as quick as I do or as efficiently. But what I've found is that doesn't actually matter. It's the steady coaching of giving people enough time during the day to do what they want and get to the job in the end, if you know what I mean. So part of a 4-day course is actually finishing tasks that you've begun, and also finding out which particular thing strikes a chord with you best. For some people it's string making, some people it's flint knapping. On my last 4-day course, a couple of people really got into making nets, which isn't the top shelf craft set that we particularly look at, but it rings bells. Different crafts ring different bells with different people.
As far as a station in life, do you find that, say, like the bank manager or the upwardly mobile with the top knot, the skinny jeans and the beard, would gel with, let's say, not being derogatory, the toilet cleaner? Does it matter at all the station in life or how much somebody's got when it comes to returning to nature, the important things, shelter, water, food? And who would take the lead in such? Is it still the pecking order in modern society as it would be when they come to your jungle, as it were?
There is a reasonably level playing ground because everyone falls into the same dimension that they're learning a new skill. And as people get of an age, learning skills takes longer. And what you will find is that there's leaders. So within a group, I will find that somebody will kind of recognize that they are enjoying presenting part of the cooking skills. That's an obvious point where somebody would take the lead. You also get different social shy barriers where people are presenting. They have a difficulty in the first place with social skills. But what I find is that being in a natural environment, that gives them an opportunity to kind of put the shields down and become a bit more normal again, because the outside world can be it's quite hard on the senses, and social practices become quite highly defended. You know, people get quite defensive. So when they come here, normally once the first day is gone, I get much more better communication between everyone, because they're starting to realise that they don't need to defend themselves, and they're all there for the same reason. And I get elderly people who've, you know, that have been fighter pilots in their lives. I get doctors, I get youngsters that have really can't actually see their life with computers and really want a different journey. And that's something that people recognise quite frequently at an early age, where we often think that all the youngsters are on computers now. Some of them are really sick of it, and it isn't the way they're going to go forward. So it gives me a lot of hope when I see people coming on a course that, you know, I never know what type of people are going to come on a course, and it's not completely male dominated either. There's a lot of females that come on the courses too.
So social standing, whether somebody is a bank manager or it sounds like I'm being derogatory or snobby. I'm not. I'm just trying to go from one extreme to the other. So social standing, somebody who's maybe a bank manager or somebody who's cleans a toilet for a living, which is nothing, no problem at all. That has no place and really no bearing after day one on your course. It's all pulled together, and then they start realizing the most important things in life, which is survival, water, food, shelter, that sort of thing.
I think there's a slightly better way of looking at it. And the way I would look at it is, I don't really seem to have many idiots on the courses. So everyone's pulling from a sort of similar dimension. It might be archaeology, it might be bushcraft, it might be preppers, it might be down to the fact that a lot of people come to me and they've said, oh, you know, I've always wanted to break us, to try flint knapping, and I've sat on the beach and this person might have done be 60 or 70 years old, but you know, their career doesn't crop up. It's how intelligently they come to the table. And one of the things which really comes to the front is the fact that when they're struggling to do something, not only are they meeting the material and recognizing that they've got that they lack a familiarity with that material, but also what they do is they start having a much deeper respect for the people that were confident with the craft sets many thousands of years ago. So does that if that helps to answer that question?
Absolutely, 100%. Yeah, not having idiots on the course and the social standing meaning nothing. Yeah, 100%. As far as resources with flints and cordage, how quickly can somebody pick up that art of flint knapping so they could make themselves a blade, and to turn out some cordage so they could make themselves some shelter, to lash some sticks together or some timber together to get themselves out of the weather?
Well, we'll deal with them as individual subjects. So cordage, for example, I would like to think there's a couple of approaches to cordage. So it's like, have you got the stock in the first place? So the gathering of the cordage is quite a big deal. And if I'm not careful, when I go through a year. If I'm not putting my foot on the land heavily enough at the right time of year, then I don't have enough cordage to take me through the courses throughout the year. So you get windows where you've got to get that. So on certain courses, people will be relying on my stock. So secondly to that is making cordage is relatively simple. There's a few techniques that you can do. There's different approaches, but just imagine strumming a guitar. I'm not a very good guitarist, and I find strumming a guitar quite difficult. Whereas somebody who does it because they're good at it, or they're really interested in it, picks it up and gets on with it. I've never found that easy, but I would liken cordage to that, because all you're asking from the hands to do is just a repetitive sort of like spinning. It never changes, it's repetitive, but getting somebody into that repetitiveness in the first place can be a little bit shockingly slow. So somebody might spend an hour and they're still struggling to get their hands to just do something really basic. And that's not down to the fact that it lacks good instruction. It might be just down to the fact that their motor skills are limited. But once they get it, which they all do, it's something that if they want to keep at it, they can command that from their hands for life. So that's a beautiful piece of information. Once you've got it, you're in. It'll always be there. Now, flint is a different dynamic, because it's about believing in the decisions you're making and making good decisions in the first place. And also, it's a bit like playing a game of chess. And a lot of the times when you play chess, you lose. And it's what you do with that failure. You either just go, oh, well, I'll have another go, or you use a destructive piece of language like, I'm not any good at that, which isn't helpful. And that doesn't help you move forward. So you're much better off when it comes down to flint knapping. You set up ideas, you plan, you observe, and then you proceed to see if you can do what you're trying to do. And you're going to get successes, but what you have to do is you have to stitch your successes together and not your failures. And I find that in your first sitting with flint, so if you've never done flint knapping before and you come to do it, you are going to go away with great respect, huge respect for the craft, but you're not going to be able to do it. Not effectively and efficiently. You have to sit and practice at that craft, and that might take, if you want to get really good at it, then you might have to put a couple of years into it. And one of the reasons you have to put a couple of years into it is you have to become familiar with the different types of natures that stones are going to present to you. So, for example, 90% of flint that you could ever pick up is pretty rubbish in the first place. So there's a precious little point in blaming yourself on that. But when you do get a good bit, and it's not about being able to decide whether it's a good bit before you've picked it up, you have to pick them up and bash them about a bit to find out what their internal integrity and their structure is all about. And if you find that you're lucky enough that you've got a piece which is worth pursuing, it's about then having the confidence and the self-belief and the dedication to make what you're going to try to do happen. That can only come with practice, and it is, in all sense and purposes, probably one of the hardest courses I could try to teach, because I have to manage the failure for people and help people to understand that that's okay, so that they can have another go. I quite often use a term of language like a staircase. When people arrive, they've got 100% confidence and they're at the top of their staircase. When they hit a bit of flint, they go one step down because it didn't work. And when they hit it again, they go another. And if you're not careful, you end up at the bottom of the stairs with no confidence left. So the counsel is remember to go back up the step that you just fell down and look at it again, stay intelligent and keep boxing clever, and you'll be surprised, because your energy will start paying off once you can start getting to understand and become familiar with the nature of the stone. And I keep it because it's like, how familiar do you need to be with anything? And you could say, if I chose to say to you that I'm not familiar with metal in the way that a blacksmith is, that's because he's learned over years how the materials behave and what they need to be treated like to get certain results, and that becomes a familiarity. It becomes commonplace. So it's about adding familiarity into these things, really.
Yeah, you touched on failure. I think in today's society, when, just say for example, Will, a driving test, I've known a few people that I'll ask, how did you get on? And they say, oh, I failed. I always remind them that unless you choose to give up, then there is no failure. It means you didn't get it the first time. Just carry on. You only fail if you choose to give up. So before we move on to the next question I have for you, as far as cordage goes and the use of flints, which you described absolutely beautifully, by the way, how integral is it to survival? Now, as far as cordage, I know how long is a piece of string, but could you just briefly outline a few uses if you're making cordage? Because like maybe a few people now I'm hearing, look, you can make string, great, or you can make a sharp flint, great, but how integral, Will, and that's just briefly outlining, how integral is it for those two particulars to carry on and survive?
They're probably there's such a thing as the icing on the cake, and they are the icing on the cake. A cake can be pretty boring if it hasn't got them things. You could say, well, you don't need that, and maybe I'm describing it wrong, because maybe it is the core. You've got to be able to chop and cut things up, cut, slice, hack, chop, and separate things. That's always a given. You need to do it to eat. You're going to have to dismember carcasses so that you can do that. You're going to need to be able to cut and manage patterns to clothe yourself. But the first top that I ever made for myself was a sheepskin, and all I did was cut a T-bone shape in the middle of it and threw it over my neck. Well, it looked like somebody wearing a skin, but it had no use in terms of a piece of clothing other than what it appeared to look like. What you then have to do is you have to think about the finality of stitching things together. So stitching comes into your clothing. When you start thinking about putting tools together, such as axes and spears and arrows, which was a very, very late thing that happened in the evolution of mankind. So I'm talking, when I say very late thing, I'm talking only sort of 12,000 years ago. Do we understand that there's a word called man the tool maker, and what that means is it's mankind starts doing combination craft. So not only is he smashing a sharp thing up, then what he's doing is he's attaching it and he's hafting it to a handle or a shaft, and that involves binding, it involves cordage, it involves glue, and it involves a high degree of management, because if you haven't got a high degree of management, when you go to use them, they fall apart. And that's going to be quite a desperate situation if you're in a thrival, if you're trying to thrive and not survive. So they're absolutely massive. I've spent already today, I've been stitching because I had a failure in a part of the trousers that I wear, and I needed to go back to that. That's the third time I've needed to revisit it, not because I badly made it, but because I'm working in a robust way and I need things to be robust. And that's the science of what you're up to. And it becomes a joy, not instead of it being a job, it's a joy. We love cordage. it's thrilling because you get colours, you get textures, you get you're getting cordage from different places. And one of the things I can say that, you know, when you get that sort of early and your nettle's growing and you need to get up and out early, you've gone into nature, you're not doing much, you're not moving fast, you're just processing nettle. But that's when you see the most and feel the most, because it's quiet. There's no white noise going on. There's no egos about. It's just you. It's just the nettle. It's just the forest. You know, it's the best, really.
So somebody could have, I have a friend in the mountain rescue, and some of the people that come unstuck, obviously you have the ones that have just gone on a long walk and just take a carrier bag and a pair of plimsolls, that's it. But some of the people have all the gear and, as he would say, no idea. So how important is attitude versus, when we're talking survival in the forests, and you've been all over the world doing this, and you are one of the foremost experts in such things. How important is attitude to having the right gear, as it were?
Well, you don't want new gear. You want gear that you've learned to, you've had for a while, and you learned to love and trust. Not only that, you look after it. You don't find your gears biting you because you're once again unfamiliar with it. This is gear that actually, you know, my sheath doesn't look like one of these brand new sheaths which hasn't got a scratch on it. The top of it is completely and utterly lacerated from the knife going in, the knife coming out. I'm not looking to replace it because there's nothing wrong with it. I don't need another knife, if you know what I mean. So there is an ego and there's a showmanship that goes with all these knives. It's sort of like, you know, you can play the name game with the brands and all that sort of stuff. But technically, it's quality kit in for the long run. Nobody's coming up to you saying, can I have a look at your knife? It's like, I'll be more interested in looking at, do I get worried when I'm looking at you with a knife? And when I'm not worried about looking at you with a knife, because I can tell you that if I've learned on courses, I can't just suggest to everybody they're going to do this without some knife craft safety, because you'll see the most horrendous things cropping up. You know, without a little bit of knife craft safety, you don't even want to give that person a knife. It's like, God, you're gonna need a hospital very, very quickly if you keep doing that. So it's not about the gear, really. It is about the idea and the familiarity and the intention. I mean, I'm not hankering away waiting to use my knife because, like, I'm excited about using my knife. That doesn't exist. It's like, right, I need to do this. You've already used your knife, put your knife back away. It's sharp and clean when it goes away. That's where it is. So the whole idea of sort of like getting noisy about the gear you've got is just a waste of time, really. It's like, if you're using it, great. If you don't need it, then don't bother carrying it.
Today's particular hive of unnecessary distraction, TV, you have briefly touched on this, gaming and the myriad of other self-destructive indulgences mistaken for pastime, i.e. binge drinking and eating. How important is it, in your opinion, that we return to the land and reconnect, or for some people, both young and not so, be introduced meaningly for the first time?
Okay, well, it is important. And one of the things about where I live currently, which 90% of the time is on a piece of, I would say I've got a postage stamp of wilderness in Breckland, and I also have my earth lodge, which is in the forest in Breckland. I asked the environment when I got here. I didn't ask a person. I asked the environment to help me not be I didn't want to be a tourist. I said I would like to feel a belonging here. I didn't just want to be something that passed through and took and scraped and damaged, but actually, so like when you're in the forest, you feel like the forest knows who you are. There's a connection. And over the last 2 years, my connection has grown, and it needs to continue to grow. I spend time, like you've mentioned, learning about plants, but also I don't really just learn about plants. What I'll do is I'll go and sit with the plant and tell it a story about me. So I'll, instead of asking a plant all about it, like invading the plant, I'll go and sit down with the plant and tell the plant who I am, what I'm up to, and leave it at that without really questioning the plant, which probably seems like a really weird thing to do. But next time I see that plant, do you know what? It seems to vibrate a little brighter at me. And I feel like I'm connected a little bit more. And it's about how you introduce yourself to things. So when it comes down to PlayStations and bits and pieces, I'm talking to you for a mobile phone at the moment. And when I finish the call with you today, I'll then be editing a movie that was being worked on yesterday. And that might take me quite a little bit of time, but that is an essential ingredient for me. And sometimes I will just chill out with watching a movie, and I'm quite happy to do that because we all need an escape. But it mustn't, it's very sad if that's become the only thing. And if you think about it, there's a lot of people there that don't have the privilege that I've got currently, which is 35 acres of wilderness to play in, and nobody's going to kick me off. A lot of people are in very small terraced environments. They don't have access to materials. They must feel quite desperately cut off. And it's very difficult to advise people in that situation as to what to do, because they probably work really hard. They might be supporting many people, and literally their pursuit of outdoor activities might seem a very far away dream. But they can do things about it. What they can do is they can, even if they took at the worst an hour a week, you've got to be able to start providing yourself with something, because if you don't, then I think that then you're entering into a spectrum of some serious mental health, which ought to be more important than fulfilling all these duties, because you're the only person that can change it. No, I always say that when you're following a dream, nobody else is going to build your dreams or activate and make them happen for you. You are responsible primarily in front of everybody else. You're responsible for yourself. And if the calling of nature is something you're feeling, then you're being very dishonorable and disrespecting yourself by not going out there and saying, you'll all have to wait because I've got a calling. And that might just be, I need to go and sit against a tree, close my eyes and let some ants walk over me. It might be as simple as that. Because there'll be something happen in that moment. There always is, just by putting your head against a tree and closing your eyes for half an hour. Something happens, makes you feel well. So
you have a massive online presence, Will, with thousands of people following your social media posts and appearances online and TV shows also. Could you briefly tell us about the Discovery Channel's First Man Out? I really enjoyed that. When you went to China and challenged Ed Stafford. I mean, that was outstanding, because even the part where you'd caught a snake for your dinner, it wasn't just, look at me, I've done this. You were actually remorseful that you had to do that being the prevalent word, because you needed to eat. Could you tell us about that briefly?
Well, can we firstly say I was shitting my pants when I had hold of the snake, because I didn't know who was going to win. That was a proper, talk about adrenaline. I definitely knew I was alive when I did that. And you can't even put the goddamn thing down, because once I did manage to cut his head off, I broke my knife, which the camera didn't show you, on the way trying to cut his head off, failed. but managed to get his head off. But then, it just doesn't die. I gutted it, I'd skinned it, I tied it to a stick before I could let go of it. So there was 35, 40 minutes after I killed it before I could actually take a break. That was that one. There was lots of things you didn't see, like trying to eat a raw frog in a river, and actually going through textures of frog skin and trying to break through. And it was quite funny because at one point I had my arms outstretched. I've got a piece of skin in my mouth and I let go, and it sort of like banjo slapped the frog up the arse. But I guess they figured that might not be good for TV. But in as much as the decision to go on it, Ed obviously knew me. He had a successful program running. He'd come to me 7 years prior to learn a little bit about a variety of base crafts. He came on a bow making course, followed up with a weekend one-to-one where we were going to do flint knapping, and we were going to do firelight, and we were going to go out and doing tracking and looking at the environment and looking at it from a first base skill set point of view. And Ed's, one of the wonderful things about Ed is he doesn't actually forget the people that have had an impact in his life. So he thought it'd be good fun for me to go. And when I got the email from Discovery, who I'd never heard from before, I must admit I was actually expecting it, because I was kind of shown spiritually that morning. I see an aeroplane going through the sky while I was laying in bed, and I heard this little voice saying, "You're going on a journey," to which my answer was yes or no. I hadn't even opened a computer. I went down and saw this invitation to go, and I read the spec list of what I was expecting, where we were being dropped off on the side of a canyon. And then we were going to be going down this canyon into a sea of bamboo, make our way through this sea of bamboo into a karst landscape, which would rivers and caves and all that sort of thing, and through that into a group of sinkholes where we had to get down to the bottom of vertically sided sinkholes and win this race. And on the way, we were going to possibly meet bears, wolves, pit vipers, wild boar, and have a relatively difficult time eating, because we wouldn't be familiar with the kind of plants that we could forage from. Although I was quite surprised when I did get there, because there's lots of crossovers that you can find. You have got a lot of plants out there that you generally see here, like red currants and all that sort of thing. And the idea of going out there was very, very frightening to somebody from in their first point of view. But I'd got to the age of about 48. Massive amount of things were changing in my life, and I was very much needing some new direction, because I was empty. There was a hole inside of me, and I was, we hit these points in life, and I'd hit one of them points, and I thought, well, if you're not careful, you're going to run into a whole lot of trouble with your own mental health. So for me, it was like, well, I'm already in trouble. I thought I might as well go there and see what that does. And it did. It started a massive journey of self-discovery. And even though it potentially could have been terrifying, it was like, if you don't mind me saying, what the hell? It's like, if you don't, the whole idea of not going would have been much worse than going. So spiritually, I didn't have a choice. It was like, thank you, this has come at the right time.
So just briefly, hearing the way you speak is absolutely great. So I'll ask you this question that's formed in my head. You're in China, miles away from home, in unfamiliar territory, yet so unfamiliar, it's like being in your backyard. How alive did you feel? Not an easy question to answer, but I can almost picture myself. I've seen the documentary. How alive did you feel, Will?
More alive than I'd felt for years. Probably the most alive that I can ever remember myself. Danger makes you feel alive, because then what you do is you come up against the preservation of yourself. and that really isn't an option. You've got to go for it, and it was really, really great to feel that adrenaline, and to have and to actually be believing that you stood a chance of winning. Because just remember that Ed is 10 years younger than me. He's 1 foot taller than me, and he takes his fitness a lot more serious than me. Because my fitness is through activity, whereas he's doing daily sort of marathons and running, and he's a full-on bit of kit. But I did believe I stood a chance while I was going for it.
Yeah, it was a good documentary. But from my perspective, watching both of you do your journeys yourselves, it wasn't, for me anyway, wasn't about the race. It was about the experience, and it was really, really good to see. So let's just move on. You are also traveling to many of our important ancient sites around Britain, presenting in video format why these sites are important and how they were used, in your opinion. Taking the viewer back in time with hands-on practical skills and demonstration, how is this being received by your audience? And do you think it's a better way for us to understand this part of our past, which is difficult to appreciate when presented with just pictures or dry perspective, rather than seeing it done as you're doing?
Okay, so in the first place, I did it for myself, because it was a way of really understanding. I thought to myself, because I was a textbook teacher, so basically what that meant, yes, I'd grown up at Grimes Graves, then I'd held a load of jobs, and then I found that I was quite a good teacher and I had skills that I could teach. But I'd done precious little visiting, so the things I was teaching were, for me, were from out of books. I was getting a reasonably good social media following through that. But I saw very much that the next step for me was to start traveling and going to meet these sites. So one particular one was Great Orme Copper Mine, which was where the Bronze Age period began in Britain. And through introducing myself, because I do have the privilege of being a second generation flint knapper, my dad's archaeologically respected and well known as well. So I can open doors, and I spoke to them, and they said that not only could I come and visit the mine, I could visit the mine when the mine wasn't open to the public, and mine from the mine and get the malachite, so that I could then go on to make a copper axe. And that was a huge opportunity to understand why the hell I was even doing bronze casting. And then when I was bronze casting, instead of saying, right, this is a bit of malachite, I can then go on to him and say, when I was in the Great Orme copper mine and I was mining the malachite, one of the difficulties was how hard the rock was, and even more so, how do you even start cutting into this face? And I could start talking about the problems that they had and how they had to heat the rock up, and then sort of like, so they're burning their way through and chiseling, and it was a massive feat to get that material out of there. And then other sites, such as again, a lot of the sites are kind of Bronze Age. Like you've got the Menatol, which is like this circular stone that you can crawl through on your belly, but basically what you have is you have a standing stone right in front of something that looks like a polo, and we can't really understand or tell the people of today why that is built there. But then you're moving on from that. It's 3 miles away. You drive down the road and you've got 3 standing stones with a great big capstone on. I forget what they're actually called now. A dolmen, let's call it. And you arrive, you just see it through the mist, and it's like, oh my God, I've got to stop. And that journey of exploring ancient sites is, for me, it's like, that's so much better than saying, right, what are we going to do today? Should we go shopping, or should we go to the cinema, or should we go swimming? It's like, no, come on, let's go out there and get across this piece of wet cow pastured landscape watching, feeling the drizzle on your face, looking at all the different cobwebs and the clever natures of the way the spiders are behaving in amongst the sort of dappled grasses, and just being part of breathing life like that. It captures you, and it rewards you with memories. And then when you're sitting there with them stones out in these places, it conjures up a time from many thousands of years ago, and gets you inviting questions of how these things happened, and you learn. And what you learn is, in the process of learning, is quite surprising. So I'll give you one quick example of that learning. Is I always thought it was a massive feat to create one of these burial chambers, and I foolishly considered that this was done for someone after they died because they were so important. The truth is, actually, the person who was going to die spent many years planning his chamber for after he died. It was a huge part of late Neolithic, early Bronze Age thinking. And it kind of went on into the modern age. There's a lot of, if you go to somewhere, some of these big cemeteries. I went to a Highgate cemetery. Some people have invested many thousands of pounds in their afterlife chamber, which for a lot of us, we don't even think like that anymore. And when did we even begin thinking like that? So part of the journey to go to ancient places, which I knew was going to happen, has been fulfilling, which I didn't know. I didn't know how fulfilling it was going to be, but it's become very fulfilling in the first place. And it's become a major source of education for me that I could never have had if I didn't bother going on that. And in terms of how people are receiving that, well, I'm getting a lot of thanks for this, because you can't just assume all your audience are of the same size, nature, structure, and freedom that you are. For many people that are watching me, they may be of elderly persuasion. They might be young and don't have permission. They might have disabilities. They might have commitments. They may lack funds, and all these things that prevent them for going on these wonderful adventures. So I decided that to thank basically my audience, I was going to give them something which they're not going to get everywhere, because one way I could run my social media is by running things out all the time, meaning producing stuff, flogging it online. And it would be a boring channel, because it would be like, here he goes again, he's making something new, wait and have a look and see what he's charging for that. And I thought, no, I don't want to do that. I want to do something much more invigorating, which is going to stimulate me and give people a more interesting journey in their time of deciding that they can use any of their touch in one project.
There must be a spiritual side to your dedication to the past. I don't think it would be possible to be immersed in your world and the visiting of such sites without a tendril of ancient lore, as in LORE, and faith bleeding through and attaching itself. Am I getting that right?
Yeah, I'm not religious. Don't follow any religious practices, but I've definitely had lots of spiritual activity throughout my life. And one of the things I do know is I've been pleasantly surprised how beyond the curtain of what we can see in this physical place, that my my idea and my journey through ancient technology has been spiritually supported. And my company, as you know, Will Lord Prehistoric Survival, has it's not meant to fail because it's so important. It's so important that there's an access to ancient understanding and ancient principles. It's a bit like something deeper in the universe knew that I was going to do this and has made sure I've got a platform to do it from, and has actually been assisting some of the success that I've had. And I wouldn't describe the success that I've had as something that I can financially count, because I'm not a rich man financially. I'm getting along with a lot of things that have come together through dedication and actually sticking to something. And so therefore, from the universe's perspective, I've been a worthwhile person to do that, because I think that they knew it wasn't a fleeting thing. I wasn't coming in for a weekend. I was coming into this for a lifetime, and I don't actually regret it. So a lot of the time when I actually make something, for example, it's not because I can make it, it's because it's born, it grows in me, and then I release it from me. I spent 2 years growing the idea of making my next set of trousers, but I couldn't get on with the job because they were going to take me a month to do. When I finally got to the doorstep of making these trousers, I knew that the rest of the month was going to be a tough one, but it was the time of my life, because it was a long range dream. Things can only sit in you for so long before they have to be exercised. Now I have them trousers. I absolutely love them. I fulfilled that piece of dream work, and then there is a problem then, because once you've done that, you take a big gasp and you kind of go, what now? So actually you have to reinvent yourself. Sure, day-to-day things crop up, but so what I'm talking about is, what are you going to do next that contains the same level of passion, true and utter passion, that's going to hold you for the next part of your life, for the next short period. And then once again, you know that when you get to the end of that, you've got to go through the power of reinvention, instead of just recycling the same old, because then you get dull, you get boring, and you get lost again. So it's about what comes next.
Last couple of questions, Will, because I know you've got places to be and things to do. In the late 70s, 6 couples and 3 children took part in a unique experiment, spending 13 months living as our Iron Age ancestors would have done and forsaking all the trappings of the modern era. This, I believe, was called Living in the Past. I do remember seeing it on YouTube, and it's still there, and it's definitely worth a watch. And it was an epic social experiment. Responsibilities aside, mortgage, day-to-day bills, etc., probably a silly question. Would you take this opportunity?
Well, I've seen a couple of the same things. I think that there's problems with that. So ancient people needed a tribe. You can't go out and survive on the wild on your own, and think that it's going to be pleasant. It would, for me, I'm a social creature. It would kill me. So I do need people, but not anybody, if you don't mind me saying. I am only going to be interested in that if I knew, loved, trusted and respected them people. I wouldn't want to do it with a hand-picked bunch of people, therefore becoming a social experiment that would enjoy watching the trip-ups all the time. I'd actually want some cohesiveness between everybody, and everybody knowing how they rocked, knowing how they fitted in, knowing what they were good at, and knowing how they were respected and part of that community. So The greatest likelihood to the answer on the way you base that question is no. But with the right dynamics, I would go on experiments which could present our skill sets with groups of people that were already respected within the community. I do have one in the offing, but I can't talk about it yet because it's the nature of the way things are. But I have said yes, and we're just waiting for the hand that feeds to bite the hook. So we'll see what happens there.
That's a really good answer, because if somebody'd asked me, I would have said, yeah, I'm going to do that, definitely, but with no thoughts of who am I going to go with, and that I would have to get on with them first of all. Otherwise, you're in the wilderness with all the problems of arguments and the fire not being lit, the food not being collected. That's a really, really good answer. So my last question to you, Will, do you have a favorite ancient site that apart from your home, that you have that holds particular meaning for you, that would always come to mind when you're thinking about the very epitome of our ancestors or some powerful energy that resides in the ground?
I've got a few, and for quite a few different reasons. The one that I suppose is the beacon for me is probably the starting grid, because it actually represents the reason why I'm doing everything. So that would be the ancient Neolithic site of Grimes Graves, which happens to be in the county of Breckland. Breckland is known as the broken land because it's a thin soiled land on chalcolithic chalk deposits. So therefore, if you over farm on these areas, you can break the land, and that's what they did some time back. But going back to that belonging, I feel a belonging in this county, and I feel a belonging and a sense of being. I feel like I'm known by the land when I walk on Grimes Graves. I feel. I'm looking for that word where you. It's the tribal nature of like being intimate with a piece of land. I'm intimate with Breckland and I'm intimate with Grimes Graves, but I've had very strong experiences, intimate experiences with other ancient places, and I've been gobsmacked by the achievements of our ancestors. One of my very latest experiences was going to Goat's Hole Cave in Paverland, and I actually needed an expedition leader to get me in there because I would never have done the rock climbing that was necessary to get into it, because it looked like a suicidal mission. But I see myself as a flatlander, but I trusted him, Andrew Price, and from Dryad Bushcraft, and he gave me the confidence to climb, and we went up and we went into this cave. But that's one of the jewels in the crown for British archaeology, because there was a 30,000-year-old skeleton that was painted in red ochre in a funerary situation, and the more you get to know about the whole situation that was sitting there, that was quite incredible. And it's one of a handful of archaeological discoveries that really deserve to be pinned on the map.
That's us to the top of the hour, Will, and I really appreciate the time you've given us today, because I know that you are very busy. Before you go, could you remind us of where we can reach out to you and learn about more about your courses and upcoming events, videos and blog? And lastly, leave us with some parting words of inspiration, if you would.
Sure. So the first thing, many of your followers will have different social media platforms. So the easiest way to access my social media platforms is you're going to find that if you type in Will Lord Prehistoric Survival, that will take you to my website. And on the landing page, you can click from there and you can be taken direct to my Facebook page, my Instagram page, my YouTube page, or my TikTok page. I wouldn't bother going to me on TikTok because I don't really do anything there. But YouTube and Facebook are my power platforms. That's where I operate most. That's where I enjoy operating, and that's where I'm reaching a lot of people from. And I respect, and it's a respected, trusted community of people that follow and feel value in the time they spend watching what I do. In terms of inspiration, I would say to you, whatever you're doing, you're going to be 99% of us are going to be crowded by chores. Them chores are going to be hammering away at us. And I think that what we do is we manage our time so that whatever chore that we happen to be doing, we do it by removing, or you literally don't try and do two jobs at once. Stick with the job in hand and try and do it as well as you can for the time that it's needed, and enjoy the time that you do it. And then when you finalize that, move on to the next one with the same mindset, because that's a much healthier way than feeling overwhelmed, because being overwhelmed with what you've got in front of you is only going to slay you. And there's, you know what, you can only ever be you, and you don't need the demands that life can actually present to you. So take care of yourself by giving what you're up to the time to exist while it's there.
Will Lord, thank you.
Pleasure. Thank you. Thanks for having me on your show.
And that was the Will Lord interview. Wow, what an interesting guy. I really enjoyed our conversation together. Will is very sincere and respectful in his approach to nature and all that is alternative living. Not just surviving, but living. And approaching the past with reverence and listening for those whispered answers to sincerely asked questions. After speaking to Will, I'll admit that I find myself too quick and judgmental when it comes to people on mobile phones and watching television instead of being outside. Will reminded me that not everyone is able to get outside and be with our natural environment. Not everyone has the physical capacity or the means to be in the countryside. His explanation of this truth is humbling as it is true. So, lesson learned for me. See the links below for Will's website and YouTube channel. On the latter you'll find demonstrations of cordage and tool making amongst the many other great skill set Will possesses. Definitely worth checking out. Clicking on his website enables you to see the many courses that he offered. I thoroughly recommend having a look at them. Most are not residential and just require a day or so. I'm intending to take myself on one of Will's 4-day courses and film the experience, hopefully this year, but if not, then certainly the spring of 2024, when the hedgerows are beginning to reveal some of their bounty. Talking with Will reminds me of the importance of our environment, as in visiting it as often as possible, connecting with our past and reclaiming that which was our and can be again. Will is a man of sincerity and great wisdom. I am definitely richer for having talked with him today. I'd like to thank you, my dear listeners, for taking the time and attending this cast. If you enjoyed the episode, give it a like. Subscribe also if you'd be so kind. Leave a comment below or send the show an email, theslkpodcast@gmail.com. But either way, please keep them kind. You can find the Simon Laurie King podcast on all the usual platforms as well as Facebook and YouTube. And so, my friends, it's time for me to go. Until next time, stay safe, be happy, and certainly not afraid. Bye.
Slick Podcast. Keeping it real and always keeping it groovy.